Today, Sigma have announced another lens that nobody asked for, the Sigma 60-600mm f4.5-6.3 DG-DN OS Sport. This lens is the world's only full-frame 10x telephoto zoom lens for mirrorless cameras. However, if you cast your minds back to August of 2021, Sigma released a very similar lens, that being their redesigned 150-600mm sports lens. Now that lens was actually very good, but is this new big boy any better? Well, somewhat unsurprisingly, there are a number of similarities between these two lenses. They're both made from a mixture of high-quality metal and composite plastics with a dust and splash-proof construction. Their button and switch layouts are pretty much identical, with both lenses including a manual MF to AF switch, a focus limiter switch, a switch for deactivating or toggling between the two optical stabilisation modes, and a switch for changing between the two custom modes, which you can personalise using Sigma's USB dock. There are also 3 customisable AF lock buttons located at the 12, 9 and 6 o'clock positions on the lens barrel to allow easy access no matter which orientation the camera is in. On that note, both of these lenses include a tripod collar mount that nicely rotates and locks at each 45-degree rotation, and both include a foot that's compatible with most Arca Swiss tripod heads. Both lenses feature a dual action zoom, which basically means you can zoom in and out by using the zoom ring like you normally would, or by pushing and pulling the front elements in a highly suggestive manner. Now, although both lenses do include a zoom lock switch, they operate slightly differently. On the new lens, it's a very standard on or off switch design that fixes the zoom in place at either the short or long end, or any marked focal length for that matter, which is pretty handy. You can also twist hard on the zoom ring to quickly release the lock. On the older 150-600mm model, there are 3 options in total. L keeps the lens locked to the wide end, but this doesn't work at the long end or any other focal length marker. T increases the resistance on the zoom, making it harder to rotate, but also helps to prevent lens creep when the lens is tilted up or down. And S mode offers the least amount of resistance and allows it to function like a standard zoom lens would. Now, although they're not far off being the same size, the new 60-600mm is 400 grams heavier than its little brother. Although both lenses use a fly-by-wire system for manual focus, they're both nice and responsive with very little delay or lag. However, the biggest difference really was that this new lens has a much shorter throw than the older 150-600mm. On the new lens, I only have to rotate the focus wheel about 180 degrees to go through the entire focus range, whilst on the old lens it feels like you need a full 360 rotation. When it comes to focus breathing, the new lens has a touch of focus breathing, but when compared to the old 150-600mm, I really can't complain. That thing is like a zoom within a zoom. One exciting improvement Sigma have made with this new lens is with the built-in optical stabilisation. With the older 150-600mm lens, you can expect to achieve up to around 4 stops of stabilisation. However, this new lens boasts up to a 6-stop advantage at the telephoto end, which is further increased to 7 stops at the wide end. And this all checked out during testing as well. We were able to achieve usable shots when shooting handheld at 600mm with shutter speeds as low as 1/100th of a second, which is pretty nuts. When it comes to scoring for build, I think both lenses deserve a point as they're really nicely built and I can't find any fault with them. Handling, however, is a slightly different matter. This new lens has clear improvements over the 150-600mm version, not only with its manual focus performance and focus breathing, but most importantly, that optical stabilisation. Yes, this new lens is significantly heavier than the old one, which is certainly something to bear in mind, but I would argue that most people who use this type of lens will shoot on a monopod or a tripod most of the time anyway, which means that the added weight kind of becomes less of an issue. In any case, the new lens gets a full point, whilst I'm going to give the old lens half a point as it's still a solid performer. In terms of price, the recommended retail price for this new lens is going to be just shy of $2,000, both in the US and the UK, whilst the older 150-600mm option can now be picked up for around $1,250 or £1,200 in the UK, making it significantly cheaper and therefore scoring an easy point. When it comes to autofocus, the new lens is significantly quicker to focus than the older 150-600mm, and this is due to it including Sigma's newly developed high responsive linear actuator motor, or for short. Interestingly, just as I finished up testing with this lens, Sigma contacted me to say that they have been able to improve the AF tracking performance drastically, in their words, from the beta version of the firmware, which is incorporated on this pre-launch sample that I've been testing. So if that's true, you should expect to receive even better results than what I'm able to show you in this test, but I guess we will have to wait to see the extent of these improvements once the lens starts shipping. Now, in low light conditions, both lenses did slow and they took a little while longer to lock on, but neither lens showed any major signs of hunting. When shooting wide open in high-speed continuous mode, almost all of the shots that I took with these two lenses were sharp and in focus, so a pretty impressive performance across the board. So when it comes to handing out points in this round, the new lens is clearly the better option of the two, so it deserves a full point, but that's not to say that the old lens is by any means bad, so I think that the 150 to 600mm lens still deserves 3/4 of a point for Photo AF. Switching over to video mode now, and when tracking a subject walking towards the camera at a walking pace, neither lens had any issues. When repeating the test at a faster pace, again, neither lens showed any issues. AF noise? What AF noise? So seeing as both lenses put in a solid performance in this round, both deserve a point for Video AF. In our Bokeh test, the new 60 to 600mm provides a slight improvement with rounder orbs in the center of the frame. Though at the edges, both sets of orbs do start to misshapen. In terms of general bokeh quality, both provide an equally soft and pleasing bokeh. So when it comes to scoring in this round, it's super close, though the new lens is very slightly better, offering nicer, rounder orbs, and that means that the new lens gets a full point and the old one gets 5/6 of a point. In our lens flare test, both lenses did a good job of protecting against flaring, with only a small amount of ghosting and artifacting appearing in the test footage. But in any case, if this type of thing really bothers you, both lenses do come included with lens hoods to help shade the front element in harsh lighting conditions. On a longitudinal chromatic aberration test, both lenses provide a really nice clean result with very little coloured fringing to complain about. When shooting with these lenses out in the real world, both of them were more than capable of shooting fast-moving subjects without any hesitation. Now, the most obvious difference that we've not really talked about so far is with the zoom ranges. Does having an extra 90mm of range at the wide end on this new lens really make all that much difference? Well, that kind of depends on how you shoot. If you find that most of the time you favour the long end of your zoom, then you probably won't see the benefit of having this extra width with the new lens. But if on occasion you find that you do miss a shot or two because the subject just gets a little bit too close and you weren't able to fit them into the frame, then this 60mm focal length could just make the difference. One thing I will say though is that with this new lens, I did miss not having the option to alter the zoom resistance like you can do on the older 150 to 600mm lens. I actually really like this feature, and it feels a bit of a shame that they've done away with it on this new lens, but I'm sure there's a good reason for that. Now, those of you who have been paying attention may have also noticed that this new lens has a slightly wider maximum aperture of f4.5 at the 60mm end. However, you should probably contain your excitement a little bit, because I should mention that once you've racked to 80mm, the aperture closes down to f5, and then by the time you get to 150mm, it's down to f5.6. Now compare that to the 150 to 600mm lens. At the 150 end, you can achieve a slightly wider aperture of f5, so this is something to bear in mind. In terms of sharpness, shooting wide open at the wide ends, the new 60 to 600mm is the sharper of the two options at the center, though at the corners it's too close to call, with both lenses offering a very good level of sharpness. Switching over to the long end, and it's the same kind of story. The new lens again is marginally sharper at the center, and at the corners they both offer similar levels of sharpness. I should also mention that both of these lenses have the added flexibility of allowing you to shoot close-up too. Now, it's not true one-to-one macro, that'd be asking quite a lot, but when you've racked out to 180mm on the old lens, you can achieve a magnification of 1 to 2.9. However, the new lens does best this with a magnification of 1 to 2.4 when shooting at 200mm. And looking at the results, the older 150 to 600mm lens produces a slightly sharper result, but you really wouldn't be disappointed with either of these results. So where does this leave us when it comes to scoring? Well, as we've seen, the 60 to 600mm is the slightly better performer and therefore gets a full point. However, the 150 to 600mm is still a very solid option, so it only feels right to award it with 14/17 of a point. So it appears that this new big boy wins the test and is clearly a step up from the already solid foundations that Sigma laid about a year ago when they released their 150 to 600mm lens. But which one should you go for? Well, to me, it's fairly simple. If you're a professional and use a telephoto zoom religiously to make your money, then this 60 to 600mm is arguably the best of the best. However, unless you can really justify shelling out the big bucks for this new lens, then you'd probably be better off getting the 150 to 600mm option, as it's still a really solid performer. Now, if you're curious to see how this 150 to 600mm lens performs against its Sony and Tamron rivals, then make sure you check out this video here. Otherwise, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, post an abusive comment, and share the video with your gran, and I'll see you in the next one.